Thursday, sometimes it's easier to find those gems late than it is for teams, certain teams, to hit on the early picks. We'll talk about that and name a few guys that might surprise you on this edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, welcome to another edition of Locked On Jaguars. I'm your host, Tony Wiggins. Seems like I've been covering this team since they got a team here in Jacksonville. We do it here every day on your daily podcast on Locked On Jaguars. And we thank you for making us your first listen because we are your team every day. And we are free on all platforms. This Mother's Day, give mom something she'll treasure forever with the fine jewelry from BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off $500. Got to use the promo code Locked On at checkout to take advantage of that. Speaking of jewelry, we're all on a quest for our team to get the ultimate hardware, which is a Super Bowl ring and a championship. But we are also in a situation where we look at the jewels of the draft as the guys who are going to shine the brightest when they get into the National Football League. Some of those guys are gems that are found. You got to dig deep, man. It's easy scouting when you're picking guys in the first and second round. But the nature of the business of the NFL is the bread and butter scouts, as you see people walking by. I'm at my office and they got stuff all in their hair and everything else. The nature of the business for these scouts, though, is to find the guys that they really, really like and stand on the table for those guys. Sometimes we look at these late round picks. I know I used to, as these late round picks as, whatever. But really, there's only going to be a couple of hundred guys drafted for 30 some odd teams, right? It's not a lot, folks. It's like 7. That's an average of 7 or 8 guys per team. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot. You'll have guys that had really, really good college careers, guys that players who are everyday players, and you can name them, but they won't be able to play in the NFL. You'll remember them from college, running around in college and being a superstar, but when you get to that ultimate level, which is the next level, they can't play. The great Tommy Frazier, guys like that, never really got a too much of a sniff in the NFL because, well, the NFL and college are two different things. And this is why we talk so much about projection and talk so much about traits as opposed to just talking about statistics and speaking on what a player did in college. There have been a lot of successful players in college that quite naturally are not fit for the NFL. There have been a lot of guys who were in college who were not particularly productive, who actually played better in the pros than they did in college. I'll give you an example. Running back for the New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara started at Alabama, transferred, went to JUCO, then transferred and went to Tennessee, and was not a starter for the Tennessee Volunteers. Ended up going, I think, in the 3rd or 4th round, and then became an all-pro type player with New Orleans. So there's a skill set. There's a very, I'm going to sound like the guy I'm taking here, guys that have a very particular set of skills, okay? And that's what, the NFL is all about. And it's up to scouts to find those guys and to find them beyond day one. Day one and day two, I was talking to my buddy who now works at Power 5, but he used to be a team scout here in Jacksonville. He was just like, day one is just like taking a test with the book open. Everybody knows what pretty much, you don't know where guys are going to go, but you pretty much know who I would guess out of the top 75 players, you could probably end up naming 60 of them that actually do get picked. And there may be a couple of surprises. The fun part for them starts late on day 2 and into day 3, because careers have been made, folks, on hitting on guys late. Careers have been made. Franchises have been changed. Um, when you hit on guys late, and just think about it. The greatest quarterback and probably the greatest player in football history is Tom Brady, who was picked in the 6th round. Now, it doesn't happen that often, and it really doesn't happen that often for quarterbacks, which is something that we're going to get to here today. Which positions, hopefully by the time this episode is over, you'll understand which positions by nature are easiest for you to be able to find a gem on day 3. That's rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7. By nature, the most difficult one is that's what makes Tom Brady so great because he's the greatest quarterback and possibly the greatest player in NFL history in terms of accomplishment. And he plays the position that is the most difficult for, in my opinion, a guy who gets picked late to play because they place so much of a premium on the quarterback position that many times those guys are actually overdrafted. In fact, it's the one position where teams can be forgiven if they pick a guy very high and then 2 years later they're picking another guy because it just didn't work out. It's almost like teams are forgiven for making a mistake at quarterback. The rookie salary cap helps that a lot because you ain't giving a guy $50 million. A $50 million mistake is different from a $25 million mistake. But many times what happens is teams are easily forgiven for reaching for quarterbacks is because that position is so important. Folks tend to have an understanding of why you would reach for a quarterback and then why you would say, okay, he's done. We're going to reach for another one, which in Jacksonville history, which is why the Blake Bortles situation bothered everyone here because it was plainly obvious that he wasn't going to ever be a championship quarterback. But then they kept him and extended him. And while they were doing that, making that commitment to him, they actually missed on some people who ended up being exactly what everyone wanted Blake to be. So you'll learn the positions where the talent level and the difficulty of establishing separation between the talent level when it drops. When the guy who gets picked 50th, he's not that much better than the guy who gets picked 200th if he's an interior lineman. Or the wide receiver who gets picked 90th isn't that much better than the guy getting picked 150. That gap really closes with certain positions. It is as wide open as the Panama Canal, though, when it comes to quarterbacks. For some reason, very rarely do you see quarterbacks that are picked late. One, they don't get the opportunity, but two, they're just not as good as the guys who are picked up top. So we'll discuss why it seems easier. I think the answer is going to have something to do with pressure. And what I mean by that is we're going to talk about these traits. You're hearing all of these terms about traits and measurables and analytics and all of this stuff. And you're looking at all of these charts. And I think that stuff has value, but sometimes I frown on it a little bit. And I'm going to tell you why I do that. So we'll talk about the disparity between or the attitude adjustment that sometimes makes it easier for you to hit on your late picks because you're not paying attention to all of this other stuff and it's not paralysis by analysis. We're going to discuss all of that, and all this stuff is very interesting because I often make faces and stuff when I talk about analytics, but I'm not trying to crap on anybody's expertise. I'm basically just saying that sometimes you can outthink yourself a little bit, and we'll discuss more of that in segment 2. All right, man. At BlueNile.com, you can celebrate all of life's special moments from creating the custom engagement ring of her dreams to gifting a classic and timeless jewelry piece, all at prices you won't find at a traditional jeweler. Now, you can get engaged or you can focus on Mother's Day. You definitely ain't going to ask your mama to marry you, but you can honor her for all of her life's work by getting her a beautiful, beautiful piece of jewelry from Blue Nile on Mother's Day. If you're looking for the jewelry but having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, a valuable piece of information, and you can do it by phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every single budget. Mother's Day is so special to me. I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I still have my mom with me, so I'm always looking to do something very nice. This Mother's Day, give mom something that she'll treasure forever. with fine jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off 500. This is a podcast exclusive, and it's only good through Mother's Day. So use the promo code Locked On. That's promo code Locked On, and every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in a discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. Take care of Mom on Mother's Day, man. We can get to the engagement a little bit later. All right, we're rolling along here on a Thursday, talking about finding some late gems, and we're going to name some of those guys just shortly. The gems that were found for the Jaguars in the past, one of them wasn't even a draft pick, and it's James Robinson. And you probably noticed him on the thumbnail, whether you saw it on social media or YouTube. He was a find. Somebody knew him. Somebody liked him. They didn't pick him. But to show you that coaches and GMs can be wrong, I recall Dave Caldwell or Doug Marrone. One of them talked about the conversation they had, and they had some late round picks, and they were looking at running backs, and they said, you want to draft somebody? Do you see anybody better than the guys we have now? And they both were like in agreement. No, not really. But they did sign James Robinson in free agency, and he ended up being the best running back on the team. So sometimes, you can look at stuff and outthink yourself a little bit, and they were very fortunate to get him in the draft. And when you hit on those late guys like that, you know what? Sometimes it kind of covers up for your mistakes. Because you hit on James Robinson, but then C.J. Henderson and K'Lavon Chaisson didn't do what you wanted them to do. And people are going to hold you to the fire about that now. But still, you can always say, yeah, but we found this other guy. I remember Dante Fowler, and in the next year, they got Yannick Ngakoue. And when Fowler wasn't living up to, his expectations, the fact that Yannick Ngakoue was, it kind of made you go, okay, that's an even trade-off. We'll take that. Last year's draft, you can't really tell yet. Obviously, I think Trevor's the real deal, and most people do. Travis Etienne was injured. Tyson Campbell came in and saved the day. He was one of those things that whoever was in charge of picking him can point to and go, see, we did that. So it'll keep the focus off the fact that they chose a running back in the first round, and then that they chose Walker Little and barely played him, and then that they chose Andre Cisco and they barely played him, and then they chose Jordan Smith and they barely played him. But they'll have that one thing they can hang their hat on. We got Tyson Campbell, though. And if you think about it, some of the teams that have been great, I told somebody this yesterday, the Patriots have had some terrible drafts. The thing is with New England, though, is this: over the course of a 22, 23-year period, when they hit on like some Canton GOAT stuff. They hit on Tom Brady, okay? Greatest of all time, first ballot Hall of Famer with a bullet, right? They hit on Gronkowski, best of all time in this position. They hit on guys like Ty Law and Richard Seymour and Teddy Bruschi and Willie McGinnis. And man, when they nailed it, right? And they knocked it out of the park. But when they missed, they really, really did miss, and they missed a lot. They're kind of like those big sluggers for the Yankees, where they don't make contact a lot, but when they do, man, they knock it out of the ballpark. You have to go and get the ball off the street, because when they hit it a long way. So the thing is those late gems that we often talk about can really, really make a bad draft look better, and it could make a good draft look even better than that, because you're talking about guys on the rookie deal that's cheap labor. And I hate to really say it like that because it sounds so bad, but that's just the way it is. You get production out of guys that you're not paying a lot of money for, and then you have their rights for at least 3 years. You can keep it for like a fourth year and develop a guy and bring him through. 9 times out of 10, he ain't gonna have a lot of miles on him because you gave him a limited opportunity when he first started. So those will be the type of players that really can make a team go from having a bad draft to an okay draft. But if you have a good draft up top, because that's the Jaguars' problem. The Jaguars' problem has been up top, and I'm about to get into why. When you pick up top, you follow all of these analytics and measurables and likely scenarios, and you're thinking really, really macro, man. You're just thinking like, I got to hit this, and you don't risk this on a guy, and it's just not the type of dude. You've heard this a lot. He's just not the kind of guy you take number one. And sometimes I just want to shake my head and I'm like, who do you think is going to be the best? I don't want you to tell me, well, based on these metrics and the likelihood of this. I don't want to hear that, man. Just tell me who you think, who in your gut feeling, just like a gut feeling is going to be the best player, right? Well, it might be a player that you pick in 10th or that you would pick 10th instead of picking first. And there are sometimes teams really, really want to move down. So it gets rid of that pressure that they have to. You don't want to be the dude that looks stupid for taking a guy that doesn't fit the metrics. So I'm going to give you an example. I think it was 4 years ago, Cleveland had 2 picks in the top 4. They took Baker Mayfield at 1. Again, forgivable because of the nature of the position. It's almost one of those things that everybody would have done it. So that's what you're going to do. Well, it hasn't turned out. It hasn't been total bust, but he hasn't, more or less his leadership and over his play, but it hasn't worked out, right? In the same draft, they did something else. They broke another rule of metrics. They took a cornerback that wore 178 pounds in Ward, Denzel Ward, right? Guess what? It worked. He just signed a second contract, made him the highest paid corner in the league, and he can play. So you go against the grain and you go against the metrics, and you just use top 5 picks on 2 guys that really don't fit, the prototype of guys that you're supposed to draft that high. One of them worked, one of them didn't. The one that didn't work was the quarterback position, but guess what? It's forgivable, right? So what happens between day 1 and 2 and then day 3? Well, day 3 that's the scouts' work. That's the guys that eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in their rental car, driving around, watching practice, going to the game, watching a guy for 2 or 3 years, and they get a book on him. And they know more about this dude at this small college, or they know they've seen him in practice, seen him interacting around his teammates, how he prepares, if he's the first one on the field, last one to leave. They have this intimate knowledge of these dudes, and most of the GMs tend to turn and lean on those scouts when it comes to making these picks. And if somebody stands up on the table for someone and goes, this is the guy, I'm telling you, you take him, you take him, you take him, you take him. Think about it. John Schneider of Seattle. Just think about it. He has this great reputation of a good GM because of what he built in Seattle. They didn't really hit on the number 1 picks. Here's what they did hit on. Russell Wilson in the 3rd. I believe Cam Chancellor was in the 4th. And I think Richard Sherman was in the 5th or 6th. That's how you do it. When you get guys, I just mentioned a couple of guys that are probably going to be wearing gold or yellow jackets in Canton, and another one that has the respect of a lot of people. So you can pad your reputation by hitting these late players. So what makes you comfortable enough to draft those guys? Well, you ain't thinking about all of that other stuff. You're not thinking about 40 times. You're not thinking of, you're looking at that scout, and you're saying, what does the coach say? And then you look at the tape, and then you remember that interview, and then you just look at them up, and you know what you're going with? You're going with your gut. And you're going with the fact that you know what it takes to play the National Football League. You know what the coaches is going to be requiring these guys to do. And you can just look them in the face and say, yeah, I think you can do it. And I think he's going to be all right, because you're tapping into his mental makeup more than you are this chart that tells you you can't draft a guy who runs a 4.6. You can't draft a guy who does this cone this way. You can't draft a guy who had marginal performance and statistics from college. You can't draft a guy who, all of that stuff that makes you mess up early, that folks forgive you for because they all do it. Now, later on in the draft, you can just go for it. I think I was watching the Super Bowl a few years ago, and they talked about the higher percentage of players and what rounds they came from. There were more guys in the Super Bowl that came from the 4th through the 7th round. Now, you go, well, there are more players chosen in round 4, 5, 6, and 7 than there are 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, that's one round, but it really shouldn't have made up the difference when you think about it. There should have been a higher degree of success because the guys who got picked early were considered the best and they were given the most opportunity. As it turns out, there were more guys, and I still think to this day there are more NFL players in the league playing on rosters, when you look at all of the people on active rosters, there are more guys that were chosen from rounds 4 through 7 than there are from 1 through 3. And I think that's because outside of that little bit of a math differentiation, I think it's because when people make those choices, man, they just relax and go with their gut, and they depend on scouts more than they do on the chart of traits and the things you're supposed to do, the etiquette, if you will, of the draft, the things that they're supposed to do versus the things that they want to do, and they just throw caution to the wind. I'm gonna name some guys. I'm gonna use my man Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins and the Draft Network. I'm gonna use his big board, his 150, and I'm gonna peek back between 150, 100 and 150. And I want to name some guys. Some of these guys that I named, I looked it up earlier. I think they'll actually go before day 3. But just in case they don't, we're going to use Kyle Krabs' list because he is very, very good at what he does, for one thing. I need you guys to focus on the NFL draft, though, because we have done a mock draft, the ultimate mock draft with Locked On NFL and the Odyssey Network. And it is currently being released in little bunches. It came out on the 18th of April. I made my first pick. Hint, hint, my first pick of the first round. All right, so from April 18th through the 22nd, and then on the 25th, you can get the Odyssey NFL mock draft wherever you get your podcast, hosted by Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson. Now, the Odyssey Locked On NFL live draft, the Locked On NFL live draft, that will be on the Locked On NFL Draft Live YouTube page on April 28th, starting at 7 p.m., running through April 29th, starting at 6:30, and April 30th, of course, at 11:30. So we'll have that on the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube page, and make sure you check that out as well. All right, man. We'll come back to you. We'll name some of these players that I think have a little bit of a shot based on, some of it will be based on the visits, but for the most part, it's just going to be based on my intuition and a little bit of study that I've done. So I'm going to name these guys, and you can go pull up their game film if you want, or even the highlight tapes just to see them move around a little bit to see if you can come up with the same conclusions. I'll do that after I tell you about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs. KD, I do not know what's going on with you, man, but you got to shake it off and get it together up in Brooklyn, brother, if you guys want to not get swept in your playoff series, all right? The start of Major League Baseball is here too. But I'm just so focused on basketball right now, man, because BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Big Kentucky Derby coming up too, man. So it's a good place for you to find out who the contenders are so you can win you some scratch when they run that big race. You need to head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. Why? Because BetOnline is where the game starts. And you guys start here with us on Locked On Jaguars every single Monday through Friday. And we are absolutely eternally grateful that you do that with us. All right, some of these players, man, that I'm looking at, some of the gems, guys that can be had in the 4th through the 7th round. And the Jaguars actually do have multiple picks. I believe, I know they have a 4th. I think they have 2 5ths. I know they got like 4 6-round picks, 3 or 4 6-round picks in the 7th. I think they'll use some of that currency to move up and move around a little bit. But one guy I like is an edge rusher from Western Kentucky named Deangelo Malone. He's 6'3", 243 pounds. He had 16 and a half tackles for loss last year and was the Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year in 2021. He had 8 sacks. So you get a guy with that production who projects to be a sub rusher for a 3-4 base team with the upside to develop into an every down player, and he's a scheme fit for a 3-4. You go back and you take a look at them. They played some big games. They played Louisville. They played against Western Michigan. And you can check his games out against those teams. I really like him. I like what I saw. He wasn't as tall when he got to the combine. I thought he was a little bit taller than he was, because for a long time they had him listed at 6'5". I didn't quite think he was that big, but Turns out he's 6'3", 243, not 6'5", 260 like people thought. But that's a pretty good size. And you think about teams like Baltimore that have done really, really well with players just like that. Bring them in, develop them, put them in the system, see what you have after a year or two of strength and conditioning, and you could have a player that could be one of those guys that makes you not overspend when you're trying to keep some free agents. Jalen Tobert. I've been talking about Jalen Tobert since last year when I asked Jim Nagy on Twitter if Jalen Tobert was going to be at the Senior Bowl. Jalen Tobert was at the Senior Bowl. It's a good thing he was, because the Senior Bowl was held where Jalen Tobert went to college, and that is University of South Alabama. Tall, rangy guy, 6'3", 190, runs pretty good, really smooth. I told the other day on Twitter, I was talking to Pete Prisco, I said, he is the most Green Bay Packer receiver in this draft. And I think my man Peter Bukowski with Locked On Today, as well as Locked On Packers, I think Peter has him as one of his guys in like the third round that's on his wish list. So this is one of the guys I don't expect on this billboard. On this big board where he's ranked suggests a fourth round pick. I don't think he's going to make it that way. And big boards are really not predictive. They're just listed as where the guy is ranked. So once again, I'm using Kyle Crabb's big board from the Draft Network and Locked On Dolphins. But yeah, I really, really do. I like him, man. I like him. He had 1,474 yards in 2021. He just does everything right. And then his one game, the game he had against Tennessee, where you're playing an SEC defense, a game with Alontae Taylor, who's one of those guys that I think could also be one of those gems on day 2 or day 3. And he ate him up. He was the best player on the field when they played Tennessee. So that's something to look forward to. I also like my man Damien Pierce. I do not think he's going to make it to day 3. I think people are going to look at Damien Pierce from the University of Florida, running back, and they're going to see that he was underused. He doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires. He's a physical runner who can also catch. He has this short little burst. He can pass protect, pass block, and he played really, really well and practiced well at the Senior Bowl. So I think Damien Pierce is one of those guys you need to look out for. Now, the opposite of Pierce, but I still think is a good fit, is Amir White, Zeus as they call him. Zeus has a little more tread on his tires. Zeus also has had 2 injuries dating back to high school with his knee, but he's really, really worked hard to overcome that. You know, when he came out of high school, everybody thought he was going to be the next Jim Brown. They had him 6'2", 225. Turns out Zeus ain't quite 6'2", 225, but he does have a powerfully built frame. He's like 5'11", 215. He can break away. He has some breakaway speed, but at this point, that's not really his game. What Zeus is, though, is a guy who runs tough between the tackles. He can catch. He can pass protect. And then he's just a dude that probably, since he's been a little boy, been one of the best football players, or probably played kickball better than everybody else, all of that stuff when you're a 5-star big-time recruit. So watch out for my man Zeus or Zamir White. I think he has a good chance. I saw a couple of offensive linemen, so I took a look at them. And you know what? They weren't really bad. One is Braxton Jones from Southern Utah. He's an offensive tackle. That's a name that I've seen a lot in a lot of mock drafts for teams that want that developmental type of left tackle. Braxton Jones is a really good player. In this process, he's done really well for himself. He's highly decorated and is lined up as a pure left tackle. So watch out if you're looking for a developmental tackle. He's a tall guy, too. He's like 6'7", 310 pounds. Braxton Jones has not done bad for himself in this evaluation process, and that's someone you need to look after. I'm going to give you another one, a guy that is listed as a tackle, but I think he can play a little bit of guard. I actually saw him this year, and the reason why I saw him is because Wake Forest played against the team that I watch a lot, and they were running the ball up and down the field. That's Zach Tom. Zach Tom, at 6'4.5", 305 pounds, is an offensive tackle for Wake Forest. He's just a standout. He's a smart guy. He started 34 games at Wake Forest. Wake Forest had one of the best running games and really one of the best seasons overall offensively than a lot of teams in the country. So it's obvious that there's a guy out there like Zach Tom who could probably give you minutes at guard, tackle, and maybe even center because of his high football IQ. So just to name a few, those are a few guys that I've seen, and there's just so many more. But if you can hit on a couple of late round prospects, and they can develop and help you in this salary cap era and be guys that get second contracts, man, that's how you get over. That's how you end up winning, and it makes the rebuild, and it makes everything that you're trying to do with your organization, it just makes it go quicker, and it makes everything. You can't, for a team that seems like they don't do well at hitting on early picks, sometimes you can supplement that by hitting on the late ones and making sure you can build your roster properly. I'll tell you what, you want to hear about more of these guys that you can find, these draft gems that you can find late in the draft. Check out the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with my man Ryan Tracy and Eric Crocker, former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker, and they can break it down to you and go in depth about these guys, about where they have a chance to go. And you make sure you like and subscribe and get that on whatever platform you find your podcast. It's me talking about draft gems today, and we thank Blue Nile Jury for helping us do that. We'll see you guys tomorrow again. I'm Tony Wiggins with Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you do what I always say. Take care of each other, and we'll see you